Complications don't have to be complicated. Well, they are usually made of lots of parts, but getting to know your flybacks from your Foudroyantes shouldn't require a PhD in cosmology. Today I'm going to break down every complication you're likely to come across, explain how they work and why they're used, and even give you an example of the best bargain way to get into one. Mastering this kind of knowledge should leave one feeling truly humbled and blessed, and what better way to represent that than with a lovely humbled and blessed sweater, filled to the brim with post-AD feelings. Or you can get one with my logo instead if you don't hate it. Link in the description below. Thank you. Our first complication may seem like I'm trying to mislead you, but it's a great opportunity to explain what a complication even is. Any additional function over hours, minutes, and seconds would be considered a complication. So how does a centiseconds, as demonstrated by this lovely Baltic Hermétique, count? Traditional seconds are fed off the fourth wheel, so called because it's the fourth wheel in the train of wheels that feed down from the mainspring in the movement. The mainspring is the first wheel, which turns very slowly, the center wheel the second, which gears down a little to feed the hour and minute hands via the motion works. The third wheel gears down some more, and the fourth wheel is the last gearing down before the escapement. And it just so happens the fourth wheel turns once every minute. So when you see a small seconds in a subdial, that's a hand stuck right on the end of the extended axle, or pivot, of the fourth wheel. To get that into the center, some additional parts are required, a bit like the motion works that allow the minute and hour hand to coexist on the same plane. The center seconds pivot runs right through the center of the hours and minutes and pops out on top of the hand stack. The opposite of a centisecond complication, where all the hands are aligned along the same central point, would be a regulator, where each is separated into its own space. Seconds usually stay in the center as the priority, with hours and minutes now alongside each other rather than one on top of the other, as we see here in this MD Supernatural. Some simple gearing is all that's required to spread those two indications apart, but why bother in the first place? The design was first seen in observatory clocks, originally developed in the early 1700s. Why in observatories? Because that's where time was measured. Forever and always, time has been based on the celestial bodies around us, be it the sun, moon, or stars, and provides a great reference for us since, you know, day and night. The most precise observation of the celestial bodies took place at the, well, observatories, and so it was there time was set. Representatives from the towns local to the observatories would come and visit to check the time of their local town clocks against observatory time, bringing it back with accurate travel clocks to be passed on to the keepers of the town clocks. This isn't where the expression passing the time came from. To make reading observatory time down to the second easier, the observatories had clocks made with hours, minutes, and seconds separated from one another, giving a clutter-free conversion from clock to clock. Our next complication, which goes back even further to 1655, may seem like a pointless display of watchmaking wherewithal, but actually has a functional reason for existing. I'm talking about the wandering hour, or star wheel, as presented here in Xeric's Triptych Wandering Hour. So the story goes, Pope Alexander VII got sick of his clock ticking at night and waking him up from his lovely popish dreams, and so the wandering hour was created to allay that frustration. At least, according to Heritage and Museum Director at Audemars Piguet, Sebastian Vives. The reality is the wandering hour complication is actually a pretty simple device driven by the same ticking mechanism an ordinary timekeeper would be. So it would have ticked just as loud and continued to disturb his popely dreamings. Instead of a minute and hour hand, there's just one pivot and no motion works, geared at 3 times the speed. On that single pivot is a carriage holding 3 discs, from which the hour is read as it passes by the minutes. The only puzzle piece missing here is how the discs turn to keep the relevant hour front and center, but that's still pretty easy. A static pin turns each wheel as it passes by on the opposing side to the minute track. And that's it. It's brilliant in its simplicity, which is ultimately why Xeric can make it for such a low price. Never mind the hours, minutes and seconds. What if we want to know what the date is? Surprisingly late to the watchmaking complication game, the date, prior to the 1930s, was only ever really seen as part of the Perpetual calendar combo, and never on a solo tour. It's a simple idea popularised by Rolex, but actually first brought to market by Girard-Perregaux, and here affordably represented by Citizen Tsuyosa. Outwardly appearing as just a number through a peephole, in many cases requiring a magnifying window just to see, the date complication is actually a surprisingly complex one. Early date windows needed setting by rotating the hands 24 hours, with the quick-set date appearing in the 1950s, allowing adjustment of just the date from a different crown position. It's this quick-set date that makes things complicated, because unlike a 24-hour hand, the date doesn't constantly move slowly throughout the day. It moves all at once at midnight, or at least for a few hours around midnight. It's fed from the hour wheel, which turns once every 12 hours, geared up to double via a single-toothed wheel that nudges the date disc along one position. For instant change dates, there's some flexibility introduced with a spring to allow a torque build-up to snap from one position to the next in a split second. For a non-instant change date, that transition takes a few hours, sometimes as many as 4, and so if the quick-set date mechanism is also used, which forces the date disc along a place, that one tooth gets broken off. Always read the manual. Another way to represent the date that never really caught on is how it was most traditionally displayed in perpetual calendars, a pointed date. It's in a subdial here on this Arken Alterum, as it most often is. However, the hand can also be mounted in the centre to be read from the outer edge. It's much the same mechanism as a standard date, however, instead of turning a disc, it turns a hand instead. The problem is, whether mounted from the centre or a subdial, it's just not as easy to read as a typical date wheel. Even when it's centrally mounted, the numbers around the outside just won't be as big as they can be on a date wheel. And can you imagine a magnifier all the way around the outside of the crystal? A subdial pointer date is even harder to read, not just because it's small, but because the maximum number of days in a month, 31, is an odd number. To fit the numbers in, every other one is typically skipped and replaced with a dot. Except that means 31 and 1 have to back up against each other with no dot separating them, reading as 311. The cleanest way to get around this is to display 31 in a different colour, but it's still a bit of a bodge. Rather than making the date smaller, how about we make it bigger with a Mido Multifort TV Big Date? Funnily enough, when Girard-Perregaux released a series of self-changing date display watches in the 1930s, there was a model amongst them with what's known as a big date, because, well, it's a date, but bigger. Rather than applying all the possible dates on a single disc, which wouldn't fit, the numbers are split into 2, requiring 2 discs, one from 0 to 3 and the other from 0 to 9. There are a surprising number of ways to achieve this. Sometimes 2 small discs are used, either next to each other, or even overlapping one transparent disc, or a disc with a hole in it over the other for a smaller footprint. The disc for the first digits, 0 to 3, can have only 4 positions and be programmed to switch at the right point, or it can duplicate those numbers to appear in the correct combination when both discs turn. Some big dates even have one disc in the same circumferential orientation as the standard date, with a second inboard disc for the other number. Just like ligmentolysis, it's a lot of work just to be a little bit bigger. I've chosen the Hamilton Jazzmaster Power Reserve Auto to present our next complication, the highly useful Power Reserve Indicator. Unless it's on an automatic watch like the Hamilton Jazzmaster Power Reserve Auto, then it's no use at all. Watches powered by springs need to be wound to keep running, and particularly for watches with longer power reserves, it's useful to know when winding is needed again. That's where the Power Reserve Indicator comes in. It's the fuel gauge in your car, or the rumble in your stomach. Some power reserves have a little red bit at the end to tell you not just that the spring is nearly empty, but that the accuracy won't be as good at that low of a wind. Of course, on an automatic watch that keeps itself wound, this is all pretty pointless. There are a few ways to present a power reserve: as a retrograde hand, as a linear display, or even as a rolling pillar, but the mechanism driving it is more or less the same. For a mechanical watch that stops winding when the mainspring is full, it's pretty simple. Drive a wheel from the mainspring that's geared to barely turn, from full to empty. Stick a hand on it and voila, a power reserve indicator. For an automatic watch, however, things are a bit more complex because the mainspring can slip inside the barrel so it doesn't get overwound, meaning there's no hard stop once it is fully wound. To be honest, this is more complicated than we have time for right now. I'm going to say cams, differentials, ratchets, and hope you move on. Speaking of cams and ratchets, which incidentally is not a pub in the Star Wars universe, it's possible to use a similar mechanism to drive hours, minutes, and even seconds on a display that's only semicircular. Rather than going all the way around, the indicator reaches the end of the semicircle and snaps back to the beginning to continue on. This, as seen here on the Xeric timeline Retrograde automatic, is known as a retrograde display. They take up less dial space, but they're much more complex to create. Let me introduce you to a rack. No, not the country, a semicircular gear with a lever on it. That lever is levered by a snail cam that's turned by the standard caliber, with the semicircular gearing driving the retrograde hand. Instead of going all the way around, however, once the cam reaches its peak, the lever drops down and the retrograde hand snaps back to the beginning. It's to my Patreons I doff my cap to for being there to make it all happen. They're a lovely bunch and we get on just swell with chit chat and extra videos and all that good stuff. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, you can join them via the link in the description below. Thank you. For the jet set type who cross international time zones on a regular basis, it's handy to have a watch that offers up the time for more than one location. The original GMT watches, like the Glycine Airman and the subsequent Rolex GMT Master, were pretty simple in execution, gearing in another hand that turns at half the speed of the hour hand to make one revolution per 24 hours. Combine that with a turning 24-hour bezel and setting a second time zone is just a wrist twist away. The quick-set adjustment of the hands introduced a new dimension, however it's not actually that clear-cut. There's two schools of thought, the Cooler GMT and the Traveler GMT. The Cooler GMT allows the quick setting of the GMT hand, so the away location is most easily set. Perfect if you're dealing with other time zones you're not actually visiting. The Traveler GMT, like this Jack Mason Strat-o-timer GMT, quickly sets the hour hand, so it's easier to change the local time. This is better for visitors of international locations, leaving the GMT hand alone to represent home time. Which is best? I'll let you decide in the comments. If one or even two extra time zones aren't enough, then it's world domination you need, by which I mean a world timer. As this Ferrero Rocher 2 world timer demonstrates, these display as many time zones as possible around the world, usually 24. There are a number of ways to approach this complication, from simple to complex, and all of them are completely pointless. I'll explain why in a minute. The easiest way to do this is with a city bezel that's aligned to the hour hand every time another time zone is read. Cities will be forward or back by the number of hours their time zone differs by. Pretty straightforward. For something a little more complex, a rotating 24-hour and city disk are included, which stay aligned to the times you set. It's like the bezel, but it moves for you. The most complex as a pusher that allows the user to adjust the local time on the main display. When pressed, it advances 1 hour, and all the extra world time gubbins moves with it. Unfortunately, it can't cater for time zones with differences of less than an hour, and it completely falls apart when you consider daylight savings. Useless. The Moonphase is a pretty simple one, to be honest. Here's seen to great effect on the Christopher Ward C1 Moonphase. The biggest challenge is that a complete moon cycle lasts 29.53059 days, give or take. So some finicky gearing is required to get there. Calculate your ratios just right, however, and you'll have some silky smooth Moonphase action. In 1816, Louis Monet created a timepiece for measuring astronomical movements. That sounds incredibly impressive, but I can guarantee that since then the same complication has probably been used to measure movements of a more bowel-related nature. I am talking about, as represented by Studio Underdog's 01 series, the chronograph. The premise is simple. Record time. In practice, it's a complete nightmare. So much so that many of the great pocket watch manufacturers couldn't be bothered to make one for their wristwatches until very recently. In the most basic terms, a chronograph adds a whole stopwatch on top of a basic movement. The earliest chronographs were activated using a single pusher for start, stop, and reset. Breitling had the wizard wheeze to separate out reset as a separate pusher, so a stopped chronograph could be restarted, but otherwise the mechanism has remained much the same. First, a clutch is needed to connect and disconnect a chronograph to the main movement. Older versions connect fine teeth horizontally, newer ones use something closer to a car clutch vertically for smoother engagement. The start-stop pusher connects and releases this clutch, as well as engaging and disengaging wheel brakes so the hands stay put once disconnected. The reset pusher uses heart-shaped cams on the hands to force them back to their starting positions. Another cam, sometimes a column wheel, not only manages all of this, but blocks the reset pusher when the chronograph is running, so the whole thing doesn't go bang. That is unless you have a watch like this Longines Spirit Flyback. When the chronograph is running with a Flyback watch, you can press the reset pusher all you like. Instead of showering the inside of your watch with tiny fragments of scrap metal, it'll reset and instantaneously restart. That's perfect for timing laps without having to ask the driver to pull over for a second while you stop and reset your chronograph. But if resetting a running chronograph should break it, how does a Flyback get away with it? It's all about timing. In chronograph terms, a standard mechanism can withdraw power from the clutch, then reset the cams, and then apply the brakes all in good time. With a Flyback, the timing has to be down to the millisecond or pieces are going to go flying. This involves coordinating the reset lever and clutch together, whilst also yanking the reset lever back out the way quickly with a spring. It's more or less the same process, just with F1 levels of speed and over-engineered precision. The absolute king of chronograph mechanisms, however, is displayed right here in the Habring2 Doppel 38, the split second. Also known as a double chronograph, it is, well, a double chronograph. For all those moments where timing just one thing isn't enough, a double chronograph jumps into action to let you pause playback without losing your place. There are 2 seconds hands in a double chronograph, with one hidden under the other for the most part. It starts, stops and resets just as you'd expect, but where it all gets a bit meta is when the extra pusher on the left-hand side is pressed. The running chronograph continues, but the second hand is deposited in place, remaining static to allow the recording of that time without stopping the chronograph completely. A second push of that extra pusher and the second hand catches up again to disappear behind the first. It sounds like a whole extra chronograph mechanism on top of the first, and that's because it is, at least for the seconds. Erlangen have done it for the minutes and hours as well with the double and triple split, but the principle remains the same. Another chronograph wheel is added on top of the chronograph with a pincer brake mechanism clamping it still when the extra pusher is pressed. A clutch mechanism allows for the slip, with a cam realigning it back with the main chronograph seconds when the pusher is pressed again and the pincers are released. Habring2 is also here to demonstrate the most unusual and rare chronograph complication with the Foudroyante-Felix. A Foudroyante takes the chronograph seconds and splits it down into its component beats in a jumping second display on the dial. The strange thing is most movements operate at around 8 beats per second and sometimes less, so a Foudroyante can usually only measure intervals in eighths of a second, which is of absolutely no use to anyone. Don't be fooled into thinking this Man Brooklyn 36 triple calendar is going to keep track of the months and years for you, because this is a plain and simple triple calendar, also known as a complete calendar. Minus the complex programming found in those more expensive calendar watches, the triple calendar reads the date, day and month, and sometimes Moonphase, without the expense. Also without the convenience, because you have to adjust them all yourself when they inevitably fall out of line. Only half the people watching today, it turns out, are actually subscribed. Many of those who aren't think they are, but YouTube unsubscribed you for some reason. Please could you check and make sure you're still subscribed, and please can you like the video and leave a quick comment while you're there. Doesn't have to be much, just tell me your favourite colour. Thanks. Unlike the triple calendar, however, the annual calendar is a bit more impressive. This Longines Master Collection annual calendar may not look like much more than your classic date, but actually it knows in which months to skip the 31. February, not so much. We'll get to that with the Perpetual calendar. It's with the use of a program wheel that an annual calendar does its thing. Imagine this as a formula that needs to be written out not in numbers, but in physical pieces of metal. That's what a program wheel does. It'll have 12 teeth of 2 different lengths for months of 30 or 31 days. From there, the program wheel either allows the extra room to go around to 31, or it blocks it and forces it to jump 2 positions at midnight at the end of the shorter months. Except February. The Perpetual calendar is more or less the same, except, as you'll see from the dial of this Frederique Constant Manufacture Classic Perpetual calendar, it has to deal with leap years as well. This 4-year cycle is what makes February behave a bit weirdly, and so instead of a program wheel covering 12 months, it has to cater for 48. Otherwise, it's not too dissimilar to the annual calendar, and in some cases the annual calendar can even be a bit more complex. Even the venerable Perpetual calendar all comes to a crashing halt in the year 2100 though, as the leap year due gets skipped to realign time back to the movement of the planets, which annoyingly don't behave to our exacting system of 365-day years lasting exactly 24 hours each. The leap year corrects for some of that, but overcorrects by a few seconds a year, which then have to be double corrected by skipping the leap year every 100 years, except every 400 years. It's a complete pain, and I just know I'm going to forget. A common misconception about striking complications, that's watches that go ding, is that they were made either for the blind or because it was dark. Striking complications originated in town clocks because not everyone in the town had line of sight of the clock face, so the striking of the hours, half hours and even quarters could be followed by everyone with a pair of functioning ears. How they ended up in clocks and watches within the home was simply down to good old-fashioned showing off. It was like having your own personal zoo or a ye olde home cinema. Things typically expected to be shared by the general public, but all for your greedy self. Wealthy so-and-sos would actually invite their friends round to behold their striking clock, and their friends would swoon and faint in its majesty and definitely wouldn't gossip about how the guy with the striking clock at home is a complete dick. The most basic iteration of a striking complication is an hour strike, one that alerts its wearer of the passing hour every hour. A simple snail cam mechanism seen here on the Christopher Ward Bell Canto lifts the hammer away from the gong over the passing hour, with the sudden return to centre dropping the hammer and initiating the strike. A repeating strike complication, however, is one that can be accessed on demand, and is a whole world of complicated pain. It's one of the few complications that can't be built by machine alone, with the component parts requiring manual adjustment in order to work properly, and not just jam up like an old cassette tape player. That makes it very expensive, even if you get this Chinese Sea-Gull version. Remember the racks we spoke about for the Retrograde display? A minute repeater uses those along with stepped snail cams to read the time, so to speak. The cams are connected to the hands driving the hours and minutes, with each stepped 12, 4 and 15 times respectively. The 12 is for the hours, of course, and the 4 and 15 for quarters then remaining minutes, because no one wants to sit and listen to a watch chime 59 times. With each of those increments stepped outwards on each cam, it means each corresponding rack can only reach so far to then run back past the striking mechanism and trigger the gong. The deeper the step, the further it will return and the more times the gong will be struck. It's a similar principle to the Perpetual calendar, but with a big gun. Our next complication, as presented by another Sea-Gull here, is technically not a complication since it doesn't actually add any functionality to the watch. If it's a 60-second tourbillon, it can be used to read the seconds, but that's a pretty much incidental benefit. The main role of a tourbillon is to smooth out the unsightly effects of gravity. We've all been there. You take a misstep and gravity sends you tumbling to the floor, rewarding your clumsiness with a scraped knee and bruised ego. It's like that for a watch, but with time. The delicate mechanism that tells the watch how long a second should last is very easily swayed by gravity, so needs to be encapsulated and rotated around so gravity affects it from all sides equally and cancels it out. Imagine it like a politician getting bribed by lobbyists. Those lobbyists might sway the politician, the escapement, with brown paper bags full of money, that's gravity. So the politician leans more favourably in one direction. Counter-lobbyists therefore need to bribe the politician back in the other direction to get them back on balance. Have bribes coming from every single angle and the politician will spin in a perfect concentric circle. Both tourbillons and politicians are expensive. Up to now, we've generally only been bothered with the business of Earth and what's going on here, and that's very typically human and selfish. For those looking further afield, watches like the Space One Tellurium offer an overview of some of our heavenly neighbours, such as the Moon, Sun, and sometimes even the planets as well. That all sounds terrifically complicated, but really it's the same extrapolations we've seen to take seconds into minutes and hours, and even days and months, just a lot further. Everything is a ratio of some kind that can be calculated mathematically, and for a planetarian watch, it's simply a case of going up further to years and even decades. One of the most impressive sounding, but actually not that impressive to look at complications is so rare, I could only find one contemporary watch that featured it, the Panerai Luminor Equation of Time GMT PAM 00670. Equation of Time, and I'll throw in a cheeky mention of sidereal time as well, record deviations between ways we measure time and how they differ on an astronomical scale. It's the ultimate in nerd-based pedantry, with nothing but a simple display saying whether these two references are aligned or not. For the equation of time specifically, it's the misalignment between solar time and mean time. Solar time is what you get off a sundial, and mean time is a straight division of time throughout the year. Of course, as the seasons change with Earth's shifting alignment to the sun, a sundial displays time differently. That's useful because it corresponds with the reason we have time in the first place. Daylight. It can shift up to 15 seconds fast or slow compared to mean time, and working out how to show the difference is a very subtle flex indeed. What's your favourite complication? And I don't mean finding out your partner is also your long-lost sibling. Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.